Charline had always known that life at Xenon Academy would be different. But she hadn't expected it to be cruel. Her bright silver-blue skin shimmered faintly under the fluorescent lights of the school corridors, and her delicate hands trailed along the walls as she moved carefully, step by cautious step. Being blind meant she experienced the world differently, through sound, texture, temperature, and emotion, but it didn't protect her from the sharp sting of alien cruelty. From the very first day, a group of bullies had singled her out. The leader, Vrek, was a towering alien with jagged horns and piercing crimson eyes. He seemed to take pleasure in fear itself. Every morning, Charline felt the same dread that churned in her stomach as she approached the metal staircase near the school's entrance. She could hear Vrek's heavy footsteps echoing behind her, a cruel rhythm that foretold disaster. "Morning, little glowworm," Vrek sneered one day, grabbing her arm roughly. Charline stumbled, trying to stay balanced. The other bullies, their faces twisted in cruel amusement, pressed closer. Without warning, a shove sent her tumbling down the cold, metallic stairs. Each step scraped against her body, her clothes tearing slightly, but worst of all, the echo of laughter followed her fall. Her hands shook as she clutched the railing at the bottom, heart hammering. "You're so pathetic," one of the bullies hissed, leaning down to leer at her. Charline could feel the vibrations of their laughter in the air, like a toxic wave she couldn't escape. Tears stung her eyes, but she forced herself to rise, brushing off the dirt and fixing her uniform. Every day, it was the same ritual: fear, pain, humiliation. Yet Charline had something even the bullies didn't know. She was resilient. Each fall taught her new ways to brace herself, to anticipate the cruelty. But resilience could only carry her so far when no one intervened. That was the harsh truth she lived with. Then one late afternoon in the library, everything shifted. She was sitting in her favorite corner, a stack of books by her side, tracing the raised alien letters with her fingertips, when she heard a new presence. Footsteps, light, deliberate, unthreatening, approached her table. "Charline," a voice said softly. She flinched, startled. No one had ever approached her like this before. Who is it?" she asked cautiously. "I'm Thomas. Human. I think those bullies are taking it too far." His tone was gentle but firm, carrying a warmth she hadn't felt in months. Charline's hands trembled slightly as she placed them in her lap. "They don't just go too far, Thomas. They don't know how far is too far," she whispered, voice quivering. Thomas knelt beside her chair, careful not to crowd her space. "I don't know why they're doing this, but I know it's wrong. You shouldn't have to deal with it alone." Something in his voice, the earnestness, the unshakable kindness, struck a chord in Charline's heart. It was a spark, faint but undeniable. She had never had anyone speak to her like this. Most people pitied her, and the bullies mocked her, but Thomas felt different. Over the next few days, Thomas didn't disappear. He would sit near her in the cafeteria, saving her a seat, reading aloud when she wanted to explore books beyond tactile comprehension. He had a quiet courage, a subtle confidence that made the oppressive environment seem slightly less unbearable. Slowly, she began to look forward to these moments, counting the seconds until she could hear his voice again. Yet, despite Thomas's presence, fear never fully left her. The bullies were always lurking, Vrek's shadow stretching long and menacing across the hallways. Charline had learned to listen for the metallic scrape of boots on the stairs, to brace herself for the sudden shove, to anticipate every cruel laugh. But anticipation didn't prevent pain, and pain was unavoidable. One day, as she navigated the hall near the stairs, she felt that familiar dread building in her chest. "Here it comes," she whispered to herself, gripping the railing. But instead of a shove, a firm hand grasped hers. "Don't worry, I've got you," Thomas said softly, guiding her safely down the steps. Charline felt a strange flutter in her chest, a sensation she couldn't identify. It wasn't just relief, it was a warm, pulsing sense of safety, something she hadn't known existed in this harsh world. For the first time, she realized she wasn't entirely alone. Despite the comfort Thomas offered, Charline's mind remained restless. How long before Vrek returned? How long before the bullying resumed? The suspense of the next attack haunted her, a shadow that clung to her like a second skin. She couldn't let herself hope too much, not yet. That evening, lying in her dormitory bed, Charline listened to the distant hum of the alien city outside the window. She traced the edges of her blanket with trembling fingers, imagining Thomas sitting somewhere not far away, thinking of her perhaps, like she thought of him. A tiny, forbidden hope bloomed in her chest. Hope that maybe, just maybe, someone could change the trajectory of her life. Suddenly, the quiet was broken by the softest whisper of whine through the cracked window. She shivered, not from cold, but from anticipation. The fear was still there, lurking beneath the surface, but Thomas's presence was like a shield, faint yet tangible. In the darkness, she spoke softly to herself, almost a prayer. Please, let someone see me for who I am, not just for what I cannot do. And in that moment, she realized something important. She had found that someone. Thomas had seen her, truly seen her, and in a world that had only ever been cruel, that was enough to ignite the tiniest spark of courage. The next morning, she would face the bullies again, just as she had every day. But now, she would face them with a new sense of hope, a silent ally by her side, and a heart that was slowly learning to trust. Charline didn't know what the future held. The suspense of danger still lingered, like storm clouds on the horizon. But for the first time in her life, she believed that maybe, just maybe, she could endure it. And somewhere in the distance, footsteps echoed, Thomas's footsteps, and for the first time, they no longer filled her with fear. The morning air at Xenon Academy was crisp, carrying the faint scent of alien flora from the gardens outside. Charline walked slowly, her fingers brushing along the railing of the staircase, each step measured, precise as always. Her heart thumped in her chest, not from fear this time, but from the awareness that Thomas would be nearby. She didn't know how he always seemed to appear at the right moment, but it filled her with a strange, comforting anticipation. The bullies had been quieter in the past few days, but that didn't mean they were gone. Vrek's shadow was never far behind, a looming presence that made her pulse quicken. She had learned to listen for the scrape of boots, the low rumble of cruel laughter echoing down the hall. Every sound could be a warning. Today, as she approached the top of the stairs, she sensed it immediately, the unmistakable thrum of Vrek's boots on metal. Her stomach dropped. Here it comes, she whispered, gripping the railing so tightly her knuckles turned white. But then, another presence entered the hall. A firm, confident stride that cut through the tension like a blade. Thomas's voice rang out, clear and unwavering. Enough. The bullies froze, mid-step, as if time itself had paused. Thomas stepped in front of Charline, his tall frame a shield between her and the cruel aliens. Charline's heart raced, a mix of relief and surprise flooding her senses. She had never heard a human speak with such authority here, and even she could feel the weight of courage in his words. Vrek's crimson eyes narrowed. Who do you think you are, human? He snarled, stepping forward. This doesn't concern you. It concerns me, Thomas said steadily, planting his feet on the metal steps. Because nobody has the right to hurt someone who can't defend herself. Not anymore. The tension in the hall was palpable. Other students had begun to notice, their murmurs adding to the electric atmosphere. Charline's heart pounded, both from fear and something else, something warmer and safer that she couldn't quite identify. Vrek lunged suddenly, attempting to push Charline as he had done countless times before. But Thomas reacted instinctively, intercepting the attack. He grabbed Vrek's arm and twisted just enough to unbalance him, the bullies stumbling slightly, surprised at the human boy's strength and determination. You think you can stop us? Vrek growled, regaining his footing. I don't think I know, Thomas replied, his voice calm but resolute. And if you try this again you'll regret it. The confrontation drew the attention of the faculty, and some students edged closer, curious and apprehensive. Thomas's bravery seemed to inspire a quiet rebellion. Suddenly, the hall didn't feel so lonely, and Charline realized she wasn't the only one who had been afraid for too long. Charline's fingers trembled slightly as she reached for Thomas's hand, seeking guidance and connection. T. Thomas, she whispered, voice quivering. I've got you, he said simply, his grip reassuring. It wasn't just protection, it was a promise. Vrek glared at them both, his lips curling into a snarl. You think this changes anything? You're nothing, human. And she, he gestured toward Charline, is weak. You're wrong, Thomas said quietly but firmly, his eyes locked on Vrek. She's not weak. And neither am I. The hall seemed to vibrate with the energy of the standoff. Charline, though blind, could feel it. The electric tension in the air, the anticipation of violence, and the subtle undercurrent of courage that Thomas radiated. Her chest tightened, a mixture of fear and admiration. She wanted to say something, to tell him he was brave, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she allowed herself to simply breathe, to feel the warmth of his presence beside her. Suddenly Vrek lunged again, more aggressively this time. The other bullies flanked him, closing in. Thomas braced himself, using his weight to block their advances. A scuffle erupted, bodies clashing, shouts echoing through the metal corridors. Charlene's ears rang with the noise, her senses overwhelmed, but through the chaos, she felt the unshakable certainty that Thomas was fighting for her. Not just her safety, but her dignity. A loud thud reverberated through the hall as one of the bullies stumbled. Thomas had maneuvered expertly, using both strategy and raw determination. The other students, emboldened by his courage, began to step forward, placing themselves between the bullies and Charline. For the first time, she realized that fear was not the only power in this place. Courage, even from one human, could ripple through others, changing the balance. Vrek froze, sensing the shift in momentum. The students surrounding him were no longer silent observers. They were participants, silent yet imposing. His red eyes flashed with anger and disbelief. Slowly, the bullies began to retreat, muttering threats under their breath. Charlene's hand found Thomas's again, gripping tightly as the adrenaline faded and reality settled back in. Thank you, she whispered, voice trembling but sincere. You don't need to thank me, Thomas replied, his tone gentle now, almost tender. Just stay safe. Promise me you'll let me help. I promise, she said softly, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. It was more than gratitude, it was trust, a rare and fragile treasure she had never allowed herself to feel before. In the days that followed, the hallways of Xenon Academy felt different. The bullying didn't completely vanish, but its intensity had lessened, and Charline knew that Thomas's presence made the difference. She began to look forward to their conversations, the quiet moments in the library, and even the shared silences that spoke volumes. Slowly, she allowed herself to imagine a world where she wasn't constantly terrified, where someone cared enough to fight for her. And Thomas seemed to understand her in ways no one else had. He noticed the small details, the trembling of her hands when she was anxious, the way she listened for footsteps to prepare herself, and even the tiny smiles she allowed herself when she felt safe. A subtle connection grew between them, fragile yet undeniable, tinged with something deeper than friendship. Yet the shadow of fear never fully disappeared. Even as they shared quiet moments in the library or the cafeteria, Charline could sense the remnants of the bully's presence, the whispered comments, the lingering glances. The suspense remained, a reminder that their world was not entirely safe. But now, she had someone beside her, someone who refused to let her face the darkness alone. One evening, as the alien sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the school grounds, Charline sat near the library window, tracing the edge of her book with her fingers. Thomas sat nearby, quietly reading aloud, his voice steady and soothing. She felt a flutter in her chest, a strange, unfamiliar warmth that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of his words. For the first time, she allowed herself to hope. Hope that the torment could end. Hope that the fear could be replaced with courage. Hope that maybe, just maybe, she could feel something more than fear and pain. As darkness fell, the distant hum of the city mingled with the quiet heartbeat of the library. Charline leaned slightly toward Thomas, not touching yet, but close enough to feel his energy. I don't know what I'd do without you, she whispered softly, almost to herself. You'll never have to find out, Thomas replied, his voice low but firm. I'm not going anywhere. I promise. In that moment, amidst the suspense of past torment and the unknown challenges ahead, Charline felt a flicker of something extraordinary, a fragile, budding sense of safety, connection, and perhaps the first spark of something deeper. And somewhere in the distance, in the shadows of Xenon Academy, the faint echo of Vrek's anger reminded her that danger was never far. But with Thomas by her side, She felt a courage she had never known before, ready to face whatever came next. The days at Xenon Academy began to feel lighter. The oppressive shadow that had once dominated the hallways seemed to loosen, if only slightly. Charline walked more confidently now, her fingers tracing the familiar railings, but her head held a little higher. She could still feel the subtle tension of eyes watching her, the echoes of past cruelty lingering in the corners of the corridors. But something inside her had shifted. She was no longer completely alone. Thomas had become her anchor. Every day he sought her out, whether in the library, the cafeteria, or just in the quiet spaces between classes. He read aloud to her from books that she couldn't fully access alone, describing the alien constellations visible from the school's observatory, and even recounting stories from Earth that made her laugh despite the hum of tension that never fully left the academy. Slowly, a bond blossomed between them, one of trust, comfort, and a spark that neither had dared name. Yet the bullies remained a threat. Vrek's anger had not subsided. If anything, it had grown, festering in silence. He prowled the hallways like a predator waiting for an opening, his crimson eyes fixed on Charline whenever she passed. Charline could feel the suspense coiling in her chest like a live wire, her instincts always on edge. But Thomas was always there now, beside her, and that gave her courage. One afternoon, as the academy's twin suns dipped toward the horizon, casting long, alien shadows across the halls, Charline felt the familiar metallic scrape behind her. Her heart raced. She froze mid-step, her hand tightening on the railing. "They're here," she whispered. Thomas's hand found hers instantly, warm and grounding. "I know. We'll face them together," he said, his voice steady, radiating confidence that Charline could feel deep in her chest. As if on cue, Vrek and his group emerged from the shadowed corridor, eyes glinting with malice. "Thought you could walk the halls freely, glowworm?" Vrek hissed, stepping toward Charline with the menacing swagger of someone who believed he was untouchable. Thomas didn't flinch. "I warned you," he said firmly. "Not today." The standoff felt like hours, the tension thick in the air. Other students, inspired by Thomas's bravery, began to step forward. Their presence shifted the balance. Vrek's intimidation no longer ruled the hall. Charline could sense the ripple of courage spreading, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Without warning, Vrek lunged. Thomas reacted with lightning speed, intercepting the push and twisting Vrek's arm. The other bullies rushed in, but this time Thomas wasn't alone. Students flanked him, forming a protective barrier around Charline. The fight was chaotic. Metal rails rattled. Shouts filled the hall, and Charline could feel the vibrations of the struggle through her hands. Yet she didn't panic. She trusted Thomas. A sudden thud made the hall fall momentarily silent. One of the bullies had stumbled and hit the wall hard. Vrek glared around, his fury palpable, but the realization slowly dawned that he was losing. One by one, the other bullies faltered, intimidated by the combined courage of Thomas and the students who had finally decided to stand. Charline's fingers trembled as she let go of the railing and reached for Thomas's hand. I think it's over," she whispered, heart still racing. Thomas squeezed her hand gently. "It's over. For now, at least. You're safe." For the first time in weeks, Charline felt a deep, unshakable relief. The terror that had haunted her every step had finally lifted. But amid the adrenaline and relief, a different sensation blossomed in her chest. A warmth that spread from her heart to her fingertips, a tender pulse of something new and beautiful. In the quiet aftermath, Thomas led her to the roof of the academy, the twin suns casting a golden glow over the alien city below. The hum of the distant metropolis blended with the soft whisper of wind, creating a serene contrast to the chaos they had just endured. Charline sat at the edge, her legs dangling over the side, fingers intertwined with Thomas's. You saved me," she said softly, voice trembling. "Not just today, all those days. You saved me from them, and from being afraid." Thomas smiled, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. "I didn't save you, Charline. You were never weak. You survived every day. I just stood with you." Her fingers traced the contours of his hand, noticing the warmth and steadiness that had become her anchor. "You always know when to be here," she murmured, a blush rising across her cheeks, though Thomas couldn't see it. Even when I'm scared, you make me feel brave. Thomas turned to her, eyes soft, a smile tugging at his lips. That's because you are brave. And I don't want you to be alone ever again. Charlene's breath caught in her throat. The suspense, the fear, the daily terror of the bullies had all led to this quiet, delicate moment. She felt her heart flutter, something more than relief, something warm, electric, and dangerous in its intensity. Slowly, almost instinctively, she leaned toward him. Thomas mirrored her movement. Their faces close now, breaths mingling in the soft glow of the alien sunset. Charlene's heart pounded, anticipation and tenderness mingling in a way she had never experienced. And then just for a moment the world seemed to pause. You're special, Thomas whispered, brushing his thumb gently across her cheek. Charlene smiled, the first genuine smile that wasn't tinged with fear or hesitation in a long time. So are you, she replied softly, leaning into the touch. They stayed there for what felt like hours. Words unnecessary, the simple presence of each other enough. The weight of past torment had lifted, replaced with the thrilling uncertainty of young, fragile love. The suspense of the future still lingered, but now it was a promise rather than a threat. Promise that together, they could face anything. The next day, the hallways of Xenon Academy were different. Students glanced at them with curiosity, whispers of admiration passing from group to group. Vrek and his gang had vanished into silence, cowed not just by Thomas's strength, but by the courage of a girl who refused to bow to fear. Charlene walked the halls with her head high, her hand brushing against Thomas's, no longer trembling but firm and confident. By the evening, the pair returned to the rooftop, watching the twin suns set in a cascade of pink and violet. Charlene leaned her head on Thomas's shoulder, the warmth of his presence grounding her in a way nothing else could. I'm not afraid anymore, she said quietly, feeling the sincerity of her own words. You never have to be, Thomas replied, his arm wrapping around her protectively. I'll always be here. In the quiet of the alien city, amidst the faint hum of distant activity, Charlene felt a sense of peace she hadn't thought possible. The bully's shadow no longer loomed. The suspense had transformed into anticipation, the fear into courage, and the pain into the first sparks of love. And as darkness fell over Xenon Academy, Charlene whispered softly to herself, I'm not alone, and I never will be. Thomas pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, sealing the promise with an unspoken vow. Together, they would face whatever came next. For Charlene, the world had shifted. Where once there was fear, now there was safety, trust, and the thrilling warmth of first love. The bullies were gone, the suspense resolved, and what remained was the story of a blind alien girl and a human boy who had dared to stand for what was right. And in doing so, had found each other. And as the stars of the alien sky began to shimmer above, Charlene and Thomas sat side by side, hands intertwined, hearts beating in tandem, ready to step into a future that promised courage, hope, and love.